This is Dr. Tim Furnish, and for lots of revelations, listen to the Break It Down Show.
And now, the Break It Down Show with John and Pete.
Yes, indeed. Thank you, Dr. Tim Furnish. For our listeners, this is Dr. Furnish's second visit with us. He is a speaker, author of several books, and an expert swordsman.
Well, not expert. Wannabe.
All right. But the funny thing that I like about your interest in swordsmanship is that it sort of ties into something that we've been talking about, which was since the Olympics have just ended, we wanted to talk very briefly about the impact of Ibtihaj Muhammad, who was the fencer on the American team, who happened to be a female and a Muslim. Mm-hmm. And what impact you think she may or may not have had in our culture, in Muslim culture, maybe in the Middle East. What do you think?
Well, I think that NBC really wanted her to have an impact, and I was struck again by watching as much of the Olympics as I could, and fencing being one of the few events that as we know, people like events that they have, I think it's safe to say that they have some familiarity with. Mm-hmm. So I follow fencing much better since I've been fencing for about 5 years. But NBC, look, Ibtihaj Muhammad, it's an interesting story. She's a Muslim woman, and she's 30 or 31, which is striking because that in itself, to be anyone other than Michael Phelps and be that old in the Olympics, or Usain Bolt, I guess we could say.
Yeah.
Most of those Olympic athletes are between 22 and 28 probably. So it's amazing that she could make the team at that age. But NBC just kept harping on this whole thing about her being a Muslim and her wearing hijab under her mask. And, I don't really think most people cared about that. They might have cared a little more if she'd medaled, but she didn't even win a medal. I believe she was on the third place saber team, U.S. women's saber team. But I just thought, that
was a team medal.
That was a team medal, but she didn't get an individual medal. And I just thought NBC went way overboard with she's Muslim. And frankly, I honestly think that NBC went way overboard with the African-American angle. They did a big online story about meet the U.S. fencers. Now, there were 15 fencers on the U.S. team, I believe. 5 of them were African-American. The story was only about the African-American fencers. It's not 1966 anymore. Do we really need to do this? We have an African-American president. Many cultural icons are African-Americans. I just thought NBC just went way overboard with this. I don't care what color or religion or gender or, which gender you wish to have sex with for an athlete. I don't care. I just root for Americans. So I think probably most Americans are like that. So that's sort of a way of backing into your question. I think NBC wanted it to be a big deal that Ibtihaj Muhammad was a female Muslim fencer. I think most people, and maybe it had some impact in the States, all that coverage. But overseas, I don't think it had any. I just somewhat, as much as I can, follow the Iranian media. And to a certain extent, I follow the Arab media through outlets like MEMRI, Middle East Media Research Institute. But I didn't see any indication that this coverage of Ibtihaj Muhammad had any effect in the Middle East. I don't see any indication that it improved the status of the United States in the Islamic world. So I just think it was political correctness, frankly, kind of run amok at NBC.
Our history in the United States is pretty positive towards African-American athletes. We've had heavyweight champions from over 100 years ago. Jesse Owens is an icon.
Jesse Owens?
Yeah, and I'm just doing a very short list of a lot of people, why is that even a story? The fact that there's fencers there, but fencers don't get enough publicity anyhow.
In general, white doesn't matter, black.
Let's say that I didn't expect there to be 5 black fencers on the American team.
30% of the team's black fencers when the black population in the United States is about 12%. So that's kind of striking. But I think that alone indicates, maybe there's not quite as much discrimination as many in the media like to think there is.
Yeah, you wouldn't think that the bar for entry would be accessible for a lot of urban kids in general. And here we have a third of the team. I think it's fantastic.
Well, we don't even know that they were urban kids.
I'm just saying
they could have been,
they
could have been African American from Stamford, Connecticut.
Yeah.
But I think the thing that, if I may defend, and I don't know, I'm making this up, but maybe NBC's approach was, we got to give this a shot because we have a Muslim female on the team. If she does meddle, we'll be mad that we didn't prepare something ahead of time.
But is it NBC's job to, foist their SJW agenda on me, or is it their job to show the damn Olympics? Okay. Yeah. I did not see the kid from Stanford who won a silver in foil. That was the first American medal in fencing since 1984, the first one he won.
And they missed it.
Did not see that kid on TV.
Was it a surprise that he won, Tim?
I don't know that much about foil, honestly.
Okay.
No, it was not, frankly, because he's rated the number one foilist in the world, I believe. It was sort of a surprise he didn't get the gold.
This is sort of the thing, though, like with NBC. So a buddy of mine won gold in Nagano, Johnny Mosley, right? He won the first. He's actually the first Puerto Rican-born person to win a gold medal in the Winter Olympics. But also, he was the first person to win a U.S. gold in those Olympics. No background story, no bio. It's just like, just this guy won, and that was it. They absolutely weren't prepared.
What year was that?
98.
98.
They absolutely weren't
96.
prepared.
Would have been 96. Oh, no, the Winter Olympics. I'm sorry, you're right. Yes,
yeah, it was 98 Winter Olympics, and he won. He did a freestyle and won in Nagano. As a college kid, I had done a story on him because I knew him, and you could tell right away he was changing the sport if he had even bothered to pay attention. So NBC's not, from my experience, they're not bothering to pay attention to the top athletes. Why wouldn't? Yes, tell the story of the black element of the team, but also be ready to tell the story of this medalist,
of the guy who's the best guy in the world.
Yeah,
maybe point the camera at him during his medal run.
Right. I mean, he's already doing so much work. Why not have that bio ready so we can jump on to the internet and look at it while we're watching this and learn it? Because you're a guy who loves fencing and you can't see the best fencer in the world.
Often when the schedule said fencing, I turned it on. It was beach volleyball, and I'd rather be waterboarded than watch beach volleyball. So there you go.
No,
at least get the schedule right there, NBC. Don't lie to me with the schedule.
Yeah, but they're sponsored by Jose Cuervo, and there's girls that are scantily clad. I like it.
Yeah. Me too.
Can I ask you a silly question about Islam? And so, if she's fencing, she's covered. Is the problem that once she takes her mask off, then you would see her hair? Or that
would be the problem.
Right. So she's got a double cover.
From a Sunni point of view, exactly. She has to cover her hair.
But if she was to leave her mask on, is that disrespectful when she's at the end of her match?
Well, there's certain times you have to take the mask off.
Okay.
It's at the beginning you have to have the mask off when you salute the referees and each other.
Right.
Then you have to take it off at the end. So yeah, she didn't wear, just so the listeners know, she didn't wear something that covered the entire face. She covered her head and her neck, basically, which I can't imagine. Look, again, 3 weapons in fencing: foil, epee, and saber. In foil and epee, you wear the same outfit, which is just the standard white outfit. Well, that's not entirely true. In epee, you wear the standard white outfit. In foil, you wouldn't wear the standard white outfit, but then you wear what's called just a lame, because in foil, the only place you can score is the torso, right? In saber, you have to wear an additional jacket that's wired. So you're basically wearing 2 jackets over whatever undershirt or T-shirt you're wearing. And I can't imagine, because in saber, you just get so hot. It's incredible how hot and how much you sweat. I can't imagine also wearing something over my head under that mask. It'd be like wearing a ski mask almost.
Right.
Something. So, I mean, she had enough conviction to decide that was important to her to do it. I could have done without her comments about how, she feels unsafe in America because, Trump is running for president, and which the media played up quite a bit, which, I mean, who gives a damn what she thinks about that? All I care about is can she fence and beat a Russian? Turned out she couldn't. Or a Hungarian, as it turned out. But Daryl Holmer, who's a black American fencer, who's not Muslim, black American fencer, came in second, won a silver in men's saber, which was quite impressive. And they did cover him, but again, they didn't cover anybody as much as they did her. But go back to your original question. Yes, I think it was just a matter of, from her point of view, again, which sort of standard conservative Sunni piety, the woman has to at least cover that part of her hair, or cover her hair when she's around. She's not in her family.
Is there a fatwa or a hadith that allows for when working, and there are certain things that you're allowed to do that are outside of the norm, exceptions made. Like if you're out doing hard labor outside, you can drink water.
Is there one for hijab?
Yeah, for hijabs and athletes.
That's a good question. I don't know. I'm not aware of any because I don't know of any fatwas that have been written in the Islamic world for female athletes. Now, that's a very good question. I have to research it. Off the top of my head, I don't know. We do know that there have been some done in the past for male athletes, but for female athletes, I'm not aware of any. They may exist. I'm just not aware of them.
I'm just thinking, like, if you're playing soccer in Rio and it's 120 heat index out there, like maybe some kind of modified hijab where it's, or just it's okay because we don't want people heat stroking, because that's frankly, that's pretty dangerous to be out there running around like that.
That brings up a good question. Although I watched quite a bit of the swimming events because my wife likes them, I didn't notice any swimmers from any Islamic countries wearing, say, these burkinis or something. Were there any of those? I didn't notice. There may have been, but I didn't notice if there were.
I don't know if that was or wasn't.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I'll be honest, I was too busy watching the divers from Rio.
Yeah.
Boy, howdy.
Yeah.
The green pool or the regular pool?
The one that they were sexy. Mm.
Yeah. The one that allowed thongs. Anyway,
my viewpoint is that most humans should not wear thongs, even ones at Olympics, but, I guess.
I should take mine off?
Well, I'll tell you what, the ones who were wearing them and diving for Brazil,
It worked for you?
Oh, yeah. She was, there was one in particular, I don't recall her name, but she was also a part of the duo, and they were both just stellar.
All right. Well, I missed that.
I watched a couple of their dives, too, where really all they did was jump up in the air and land in the water.
Good.
Yeah.
You're
terrific.
Yeah.
Yep.
The one thing about diving that I didn't like, and I'm not trying to get all Olympic-y on this so we can cut this out if we need to. The one thing I thought was ridiculous about the diving was the stupid splash-o-meter. Like, the thing was shown from the wrong perspective. Like, in years past, they'll show a horizontal shot of the water. So at least you have some perspective to go, oh, that was a kind of a big splash. Like that, and then to know what point deduction, great. But don't show me, like, a vertically based shot of the pool.
Splash-o-meter.
Yes.
I was waiting for someone to do the triple Lindy, but I guess, since the demise of Rodney Dangerfield, the triple Lindy's fallen out of fashion.
Yeah, and multiple diving board dives are not allowed.
Exactly.
Yeah, not allowed. Yeah. Too dangerous. Only one man can pull that off.
That's too bad. That's right. And he's passed. God love him.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about, since we had, I'll say, a disappointing result from Ibtihaj Muhammad's Olympic bid. And by disappointing, I mean, hey, great that she went, great that she won a team medal, great that she could do that in her 30s. I have to celebrate that being in my advanced age. But, I think that what we could have had was great representation of why diversity is important in this day and age, because the problem that we seem to run into with these, with Islamic hardliners is they're mired in the thinking patterns of the 8th century.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And, I really would have loved to have been able to say, hey, a Muslim American, a Muslim can come here and be female and represent the country and show her athletic prowess and dominance. Mm-hmm. And just not being able to say that very last part with the dominance sort of makes the point easy to ignore. So I don't know when we'll get that opportunity again. She'll probably be a little old to make the team next time around.
Yeah, 35 is really pushing it, fencing. I mean, there have been a couple of like Hungarian, Italian guys that did it in their 40s, but that's very much the exception.
Yeah.
It's also their one of their country's main sports too. I mean,
right. Chess and fencing. That's what they do in Hungary, right?
Yeah, and horses
at the same time too.
Yeah, all of them at once. Yeah,
So where else will we get these opportunities though, where we can say, hey, world, this is America, and you can try and hate us if you want, but your own folks are coming over here and getting great opportunity and showing greatness.
Yeah, but but look, here's the thing. They don't, the conservatives, and by that I don't mean just conservatives, I guess you could say with a capital C. I don't mean just ISIS, but the people that are conservative, traditionalist, in the Islamic world think that women shouldn't be competing anyway.
Yeah.
So we're just proving how infidelistic we are, if you will, and she's proving how she's not really a good Muslim, because she should be home and not out, in a somewhat tight-fitting pair of fencing pants
on display to the world,
displaying herself to the world. She is not being a good Muslim, or she should fence with an entire burqa on, including her face covered, which would probably make it hard to score points. But that's the viewpoint on that. Look, most the Muslims that aren't of that persuasion know what things are like here. There have been any number of, not that many, but there have been a few Muslim commentators that have pointed out, look, Muslims have more rights in the West than Christians and Jews and Hindus and atheists have in the Muslim world. Okay, I've read this stuff, and the Egyptian media is particularly good at throwing this out there. Most people realize that. Okay, so the problem is not that we aren't giving Muslims enough opportunities. The problem is sort of that we haven't whole hog, no pun intended, adopted Sharia and become Muslims, because that's the only thing that really would endear us,
satisfy anybody, right?
Yes, and on the other extreme. I guess you'd say complementary to that, better way of putting it, is that we are, although we purport to be Christian, our country is really just sort of a cesspool of pornography and people who, dance at parties and worse, going back to, say, Qutb. So, I don't think, my point is, I don't think any amount of parading out Muslim or Muslim
success stories
is going to change minds, because the people that are going to be persuaded by that already know that. Okay, you've got a lot of people in the Islamic world, a minority of 1.6 billion is still a hell of a lot of people who are very conservative, very traditionalist, who support Sharia. Look at the Pew data from 2012, 2013. Majorities of people in places like Egypt and Jordan and other places support Pakistan as one of the worst. Support things like stoning for adultery and the death penalty for apostasy, right? So their minds are not going to be changed by some female Muslim woman wearing a hijab, all right? The picture, the problem is far more than one of windrow dressing and PR. The one is it's not in vogue to say it. It's politically incorrect to say it, but it truly is a clash of civilizations, as Huntington pointed out back in 1990.
Mm. So what do we do? I mean, if you're advising the next person to be president, whoever it is, what stance do we take? How do we figure out how to build this bridge so we can reduce the amount of conflict?
Well, I think that the West has been building bridges for centuries, if you will, and it's damn time for the Muslim world to ante up. Okay, I am tired of going to Cairo and apologizing for the existence of Western civilization, as the president did. And I think it's ludicrous that every time he gives a speech, he brings up the Crusades. Hey, Barack, the last time I checked, and I'm a historian, the Crusades ended 900 years ago. Okay, and by the way, Americans weren't doing it last time I checked. Okay,
right.
The Crusades ended 900 years ago. Jihad has never ended. Okay, jihad has gone from being a state enterprise, because the Ottoman Empire is not there anymore, to, one could argue, a non-state enterprise waged primarily by groups. I believe the last state declaration of jihad was by the Ottomans in 1914. When they entered World War I on the side of the German Empire, the Mufti of Istanbul issued a fatwa of jihad against the English and the French. But since then, it's been groups like ISIS and Al Qaeda and, fill in the blank, Boko Haram, Taliban, those sort of folks. When's the last time a pope, proclaimed a crusade? Been quite a while, okay? But yet we have this garbage. Like, remember, not a couple weeks after 9/11, President Bush said something like, "We're gonna go on a crusade to get the people that did this." And I swear he caught more flack for using the word crusade than Bin Laden did for ordering the bombings of the World Trade Center. It was ridiculous. The West has to stop apologizing. It is time for the Muslim world to ante up, to man up, and say, you know what? We have a problem. I mean, you have some Muslims that are willing to say this. President al-Sisi of Egypt, in particular comes to mind. Last January, he gave a speech and he called on the clerics at Al-Azhar in Cairo, which is the highest Sunni authority of Islam. He called on them to do something about the terrorism waged in the name of Islam. And there's some other Muslim leaders that have said things along these lines, but I swear to God, al-Sisi is harder on his own on Muslims and Islam than President Obama is. I don't know why an American president has to basically continually apologize for Western civilization, but it's part of his view that's shared by many on the left and many on the far left and many on the far right, that like jihad and terrorism are somehow caused by us, that they didn't exist until George Bush invaded the Middle East. Again, this is profoundly ahistorical. Jihad goes back to the founder of Islam, right? It is embedded. It is a key part of Islam. Muslims are going to have to disabuse themselves of things like jihad. And they're the only ones that can do it. We can't do it. I think an American president should challenge them to do it and say, you know what? Like if I have a sick friend, I don't go over to his house and he's clearly wasting away. He's got problems. He's coughing and sneezing all the time and say, man, you're looking good. I say, get thee to a physician. Islam need to get down to brass tacks and say, look, the vast majority of the groups in the world that are waging terrorism are doing it in the name of Allah. Now, if they're not Muslim, then you guys go disabuse them of it and delegitimize them, and you take care of it. I mean, for God's sake, 2 years ago, the United Arab Emirates put out put out a list of, you may have seen this, it was in summer 2014. The UAE put out a list of terrorist groups, right? 83 groups that the UAE deemed terrorist, and 82 of them were Muslim. Now, this was the United Arab Emirates. I'm pretty sure the United Arab Emirates is not Islamophobic. 40 of the 69 groups, or 41 of the 69 groups on the current State Department list of terrorism, which I'm pretty sure John Kerry and Barack Obama are in charge of, are Islamic. But yet then we'll turn around and say things like, the administration spokes tools will say things like Islam has nothing to do with terrorism. Yes, it does. It has quite a bit to do with terrorism.
Yeah, it's a discriminator. The president
needs to challenge people on that and stop pretending it's not the case.
It is a discriminator.
Hold on a second, though. I want to expand on this point because, Tim, a lot of our listeners don't know us don't know you like we do. And they are going to hear that sentence and go, man.
Yeah.
Islamophobe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But let's talk about specifically why.
Charge is I've spent, let's see, I enlisted in the Army in 1983 to learn Arabic, and since then I've done the coursework. I spent my time in the 101st. I learned Arabic. I then did a master's degree in Arabic. I did a PhD in Islamic history, and you do not spend this much time studying a culture and a people if you hate them.
Yeah, that's a fair point. You talked about the perception that like we've invented this jihad stuff and that it's we're the ones causing it. And I know both of the last two presidents have had this sort of, if we don't identify people as Islam, they won't get as mad at us. But I think you're making a great point in that there are a lot of people who use Islam as a discriminator to create a us versus them kind of a fight, or they use
many of the people that do that are Muslim.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. Yeah, yeah.
I mean, it's not something Dick Cheney came up with.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm trying to say. Is that
I heard Gary Johnson this morning before I went to church. Gary Johnson was on with Chris Wallace, and standard Ron Paul issue ideology. That basically Bush's invasion of Iraq created jihad. Really, that would have been news to the founder of Islam, who waged jihad in the year 630 A.D.
Yeah,
it's not Islamophobic to point out reality.
Yeah.
I just wanted to let that comment sit for a second.
Yeah. Yeah. You said another thing that's pretty powerful, too. You talked about, but you said it in the correct language, too. There's no Christians out saying our version of Allah Akbar and then pushing a button.
Deus Vult is not being proclaimed anymore. That's what the Crusaders said, okay? That dropped off about eight and a half centuries ago. Yeah, look at this, the State Department terrorist list again. I look at this regularly. Has it's over 70% Muslim groups. There are two ostensibly Christian groups on there, okay? And I say ostensibly because they're really not. One is the Continuity Irish Republican Army, and one is the, I don't know, sometimes drunk Irish Republican Army or something like that. I don't remember the exact name of it. But basically it's 6 guys in a pub with access to a fax machine that haven't done anything since, 1996.
Right.
But it makes the State Department feel better because they can say, oh, look, we have 2 Catholic groups on there. Of course, begging the question, the IRA was never a Catholic terrorist organization. It's an Irish nationalist terror organization. Yes. So anyway, so there's that. And then there's even one Jewish group on there that, remember Mahir Kahana, who was killed back in, 92 or 93 or something?
Yeah.
His group is still on there. I don't think they even have members anymore. But the State Department could say, oh, look, we have a Jewish group on the list, okay? The fact is now, there's 1.5 billion Muslims in the world, 1.6. Most of them are not terrorists. But most of the world's terrorists are yelling Allahu Akbar as they do what they do. So there is certainly a connection.
Let's talk specifically about why that connection.
Mm-hmm.
I would like for our listeners to be enlightened before they pass judgment on that statement as whatever. What is the difference between that faith, which has, like you said, a majority of participants who are not terrorists? We've said that, listeners.
Mm-hmm.
What is the difference that allows that faith to embolden certain people to do those kinds of acts? What is it?
Legitimizes violence against non-adherents, shall we say.
Okay.
Well,
perfectly
what it is,
said. Yep.
Yes. The reason is that.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete Turner.
And if you like the show,
do us a favor.
Yeah, share it.
That's the biggest thing, honestly.
All your social media outlets, all your friends, let them know the ones that you like.
Yeah. I mean, we make this show for you guys. If you think it's great, say so. Say so by sharing it. Say so by putting a comment in after the show.
Also, if you go to iTunes or Stitcher or wherever you listen to podcasts, give us a rating. Give us a review. If you think the show is great, please give us 5 stars and say so. And if you think the show really sucks, please give us 5 stars and say so.
Because, heck, we're listening.
That's right.
You can't be more approachable than us. We want to make the show better. If there's something that we're missing, let us know. That really is how you help us.
That's right. Tell us all about it. Thanks for listening.
And now, back to the show.
Well, there's a couple things that are closely interrelated. One is that the Quran, frankly, is very violent. And I challenge those that are, turning up their nose and putting their finger down their throat at this point to go read it, okay? I remember once talking to a guy from the State Department at a little soiree I was at in the D.C. area who, took exception to some of my rules. And I asked him if he'd ever read the Quran. And he said, I don't have to, in that fruity sort of Bostonian accent that way too many people in the State Department have. No, he didn't have to read it. He sounded like Frasier. No, maybe, dude, you should actually read it since you're in the State Department and you're dealing with Iraq. It might be helpful.
That is the norm for the State Department.
We know exactly.
That is the norm. There's too much of that nonsense where they're trying to solve a problem that they choose to know nothing fucking about. And it pisses me off. I hate hearing that shit.
They have an MBA from Harvard, so they think they know everything.
Yeah, I have an MBA in doing the fucking work. I have a PhD in doing the fucking work and talking to people on the goddamn ground, and I hate hearing that stuff because they don't fix anything. They fuck shit up all the time. I'm sorry. It makes me mad, man. Sorry.
Oh, you know what I'm talking about. See, and I want your listeners to be aware of this, okay?
I wish our listeners could see spit flying out of Pete's mouth because he does get pissed at this.
It aggravates me.
Sorry, Pete.
I
figured you know what I was talking about.
I'm going to jump in and tell the story. So we're sitting there in a governor's office with a bunch of people from his district, and then you have a State Department guy.
A governor of where?
Afghanistan, of like a state, like a county-sized element in a state that's very close to Pakistan and very Taliban influenced. And so this guy is trying to govern the most populated place in the state, and very challenging, a lot of complexity. And the State Department guy is interacting with this guy in front of his peers, in front of his people, and they had this building that was intended to be something. And the governor says, I want that to be a school for girls. And the State Department guy says, that is built to be a demonstration farm. And the governor says, well, it's going to be a school for girls. That's what it's going to be. And the guy is rolling his eyes and scoffing at him and belittling him. the whole time. And it's like, look, number one, you can't do that shit in front of somebody else, especially when they're trying to lead people.
Right.
And two, he's the fucking governor, not
Right.
you.
Yeah.
And then, the governor above him wanted it to be something different, according to the State Department guy. That's neither here nor there. That's between that's governor to governor business. Right. But this guy, and then when I asked him about it, he's like, well, it's not his decision. Like, what the fuck? What do you mean it's not his decision?
What did he want it to be?
An agricultural demonstration farm.
What is that?
It's some bullshit program that they have where they try to show farmers how to farm.
Farmers.
Yes.
In Afghanistan.
How to farm.
How to farm.
I want to say that agriculture, was agriculture not born in that region of the world 8,000 years ago? You don't think that fucking guy knows how to grow a pomegranate?
Well, there you go. And that's it. I mean, so they insult the guy. And so basically the governor's like, well, this meeting's over. I'm leaving. This is nonsense. I'm not going to get told what to do in my own fucking office. And so he gets up and he leaves. It's that kind of attitude where they don't need to read the Quran.
Right, they know.
You don't have to read it word for word, but you do need to study
us.
it.
We just need to shut up and listen because they're smarter than us.
Yeah.
Because that's why they're in the State Department. Anyway. So
we were talking about the inherent characteristics of the faith.
What is it about? Why are so many of the world's terrorists Muslims? Which is an undeniable fact. They are, okay? Islam legitimizes violence to a degree that no other religion in the world currently does, for a couple of reasons. One is the Quran itself is, and this is my point of departure a moment ago. Have you ever actually read it? Try reading books instead of burning them, as Dr. Henry Jones said.
Yes.
The Quran lionizes violence against non-Muslims in a way that no other document does. And I've taught world history and world religions, and I've read most of the founding texts of most of the major world religions. I'm a practicing Christian. I've read that. Is there violence in the Old Testament? Yes, but here's the difference. The violence in the Old Testament is limited in space and time. Okay, it applies to the Israelites, the ancient Hebrew people, taking possession of the Promised Land, circa 1150 BC or something like that. And they do some pretty nasty things. I mean, Deuteronomy talks about that. But nowhere in the Hebrew scriptures does it say that applies to the entire world, and that the entire world should be converted to Judaism, where they should have their heads dashed against rocks. It doesn't say that anywhere. I mean, there may be three or four rabbis on the West Bank that believe that, but they're a distinct minority. Okay, the Christian New Testament, which I have read a number of times in my 50 years as a Christian, nowhere promotes violence. That guy Jesus is not really down with violence. Okay. Muhammad, on the other hand, engaged in violence. Muhammad led armies in battle. According to the Islamic biographers of Muslim, again, not Dick Cheney's staff or not Donald Trump's people, Muhammad himself ordered the beheadings of opponents. Muhammad was a military commander as well as, according to the Muslims, a prophet. Okay, and he was also a political leader, basically a king, more or less, before he died in 632 AD. Right? This And this sort of behavior basically is legitimized in the Quran, with its many, many passages saying jihad against that Muslims should wage jihad fi sabilillah, in the path of Allah, until the entire world is Muslim or until it submits to Islam. It applies, as we say in history, the discipline of history, it applies across space and time. Right? Now, most of the world's Muslims, I think, have better things to do with their life than try to go out and forcibly convert people at the point of a blade, okay? But if you are of one of those people who wants to do things like that and has convinced yourself that Allah really wants you to do it,
you've got a text that encourages you.
You've got backup. You've got sanction.
Right.
This is why it is so hard to delegitimize ISIS. ISIS... Read their Dabiq magazines. Unfortunately, I've read them all. Watch their videos. Okay. ISIS says, you know why we behead? Because Surat al-Muhammad verse 3 and 4 and Surat al-Anfal verse 12 says, behead the unbelievers when you encounter them on the battlefield. Okay. We are doing exactly what Allah said. We are doing exactly what the Prophet Muhammad did in his time. We are the good Muslims. You guys that aren't manning up and doing this are the bad Muslims. Right? It's hard to delegitimize that. I have sitting on my desk over here a book by a Syrian sheikh, Muhammad al-Yaqubi, who's a Syrian sheikh who published a book last year, which is translated into English, called Refuting ISIS. It's about a 65-page little book. I've read the whole thing. And the entire book basically consists of, you're not Muslim. You know why? Because I say you're not. That's not going to get it done, my good sheikh. Okay? You read Dabiq. Again, most people have better things to do with their life than read Davic. But again, I've read these things. ISIS cites in their Davic magazine dozens of times the Quran and the Hadiths, okay? And frankly, they're not just cherry-picking passages, okay? They are drawing upon the fact that the Quran very much does legitimize violence against non-Muslims. And the major reason that they can do this is that the common little complex phrase, but it's one that applies here, the common exegetical paradigm, the common pattern for interpreting the Quran, which is the majority one accepted in the Sunni world, which is the majority of the world's Muslims, is a literalist one. You are not allowed in Sunni Islam to say that the beheading passages only applied in the Prophet's time, or the Prophet Muhammad metaphorically. When you are debating with a non-Muslim, you can behead their argument or something. No, it literally means, of course, I published an article in 2005 in Middle East Quarterly, which is still like the only even quasi-scholarly article that I know of written on beheading. I examined these passages in the Quran that deal with beheading, and I looked at the major Islamic commentators across the years, al-Zamakhshari, Maududi, and a couple of others. I don't remember off the top of my head who I quoted, but it was Islamic scholars. What do these beheading passages in the Quran mean? They mean exactly what they say, okay? They don't mean anything metaphorical. I mean, the example I often use for people is the passage where Jesus says, where he's giving, it's in the Gospel of, I believe it's in Matthew and it's in Luke, where Jesus is talking to the apostles, or the disciples, I should say, the 72, not the 12, and he says, I will send you out with power, and one of the powers that you will have will be you will be able to pick up poisonous snakes, right? And, there are people that do this, right?
Yes.
They used to have a TV show, and they're in eastern Tennessee and eastern Kentucky. And, in fact, I went to school. I don't know if I've told you guys this before. I went to school with a guy back in the 70s whose father was a snake handler church pastor. He died. He died. Yeah, because remember, if you get bit by a snake, they bring the poison snakes out, the copperheads, the water moccasins, and they bring them out, and, God will protect you. If you get bit in a church service, you cannot go to the doctor. If you're mowing the yard and you get bit by a poison snake, yeah, but not if you're he died.
Right.
It's kind of funny now, but it's kind of pathetic. Well, by the way, this is why there aren't that many snake handler Christians, but basically most of us, 99.9% of us that are Christians are like, you guys are whacked, okay? Jesus was talking to the guys standing right in front of him.
Yes.
Giving those guys the power to do that. And since you're not St. Paul or St. Peter or St. Thaddeus, okay, don't go picking up poisonous snakes.
Yeah. He wasn't thinking, who ought to pick up a poisonous snake? A guy in eastern Kentucky about 2,200 years from now.
Yeah.
But I'm from Kentucky, so I know. But in Islam, it's not like that. In Islam, the literal meaning applies.
Yeah.
Okay? There are sects of Islam, and lest anyone get too excited, that S-E-C-T-S. There are sects of Islam that do not interpret the Quran literally, but they are just that, sects. They are minorities, groups like the Ismailis, who are the second largest group of the Shia, the Ahmadis, who are in Pakistan and certain other places, some of the Sufi groups. There are groups that, in real numbers add up to tens, millions of people.
Right.
But as a distinct minority within Islam, who don't think this way.
Are those groups represented in the U.S.? I know there are Sufis in the U.S.
Yeah, right. But are there Ahmadis?
There are Ismailis. In fact, there's an Ismaili Jamkhana or whatever it's called temple. They don't use mosques over here, not far from me, north of Atlanta. There are some Ahmadis. In fact, Fox often has on this one Ahmadi chap. I can't remember his name. Megyn Kelly has him on all the time. I don't remember his name. But the thing about Ahmadis is interesting is they're, of course, like many sects, considered heretics. So this guy will come on TV and say, well, Islam does not believe in violence. Well, actually, Islam does. Your sect does not. But that's sort of like, no offense to anyone, but that's sort of like a member of the Mormon church coming on and saying what
and speaking for Christianity in general.
Not teach. Well, no, You're only speaking for Mormons because most Christians don't accept you as mainstream. Right. But again, the difference is Catholics don't go out and put bombs on the Mormons. They don't go to the Mormon steak house, whatever it's called, on Saturday and put IEDs on their cars. Whereas in Pakistan, they'll go do that to the Ahmadis.
Yeah, the history of being the caliph is one of ending up you getting your head chopped off. I mean, is there a single caliph, Tim, that didn't get murdered by?
Oh, many of the Ottoman ones did not. But, of course, they killed their own brothers, so their brothers couldn't take over.
It's a reaping of being, when you're the caliph, there's a bad end for somebody, yeah.
But that's an interesting issue about the Caliphate. Since, Baghdadi has claimed to have resurrected it since it fell with the Ottomans. But, across space and time, across Islamic history, 14 centuries, we're now into the 15th Muslim century, since it's year 1437, there have been multiple caliphates, some at the same time. There'd be 3, 4, 5, 6 guys in different places claiming to be the caliph. So it's kind of funny because there are some Muslims, and not just terrorists like ISIS, that are convinced that if they just had a caliph back in charge of the world's Muslims, everybody would hold hands and sing Kumbaya, but it never worked like that. I mean, there's a group called Hizb ut-Tahrir, which means Party of Liberation, been around since the 50s. And they have regular meetings in the United States. I've been to a couple of their confabs up near Chicago. And they are a non-terrorist group, but they are distinctly political, Islamist political, and they want to bring back the caliph. And they are these guys that think really if they had a caliph, Muslims was all suddenly marching in lockstep and the world would become Muslim. And I'm like, well, that never happened before in history. I think you guys have a bit of a romantic view of the world. But, at least they aren't blowing people up, so...
Well,
guys, let me say something about this real quick. And a lot of my conservative friends get mad at me. This is a related issue about the issue of the Muslim Brotherhood. I don't know if you've seen, there's this movement afoot that gets among some Republican congressmen to get the Muslim Brotherhood labeled a terrorist organization. Have you seen this?
No.
I don't support this. I do not think the Muslim Brotherhood is a terrorist organization. And some of my conservative friends got very mad at me about this. I think the Muslim Brotherhood is a very political organization. It's not terrorist, though. I mean, there's a difference. I mean, I basically, if a group wants to be politically Islamist, that's fine. But on the other hand, they have to be able to handle criticism coming back the other way. All political Islam is not terrorism. And so some of my conservative friends part ways with me on that one.
Well, that is why we think you have an enlightened point of view.
I don't know if it's enlightened, but it's informed, I'll say that.
Informed is the right word. Informed is absolutely the right word. I have I'll say a spiritual guide who's a guy named Rob Bell. He's been on our show, and he told me a couple of things when I brought him my own crisis of faith. He said, number one, that the things that you have crisis with, you have to understand that the literal things that are in the Bible are there for a number of reasons. And he cited specific places in the Bible where he said, this is what it says. Now, in context for when it was said, and in the language in which it was said, and how it was translated, the metaphor that we ought to learn from is this. And he made it make perfect sense in a metaphorical way. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But see, that's acceptable in Judeo-Christian thought. Metaphor, right. Allegory, symbolism.
Yes.
As far back as the medieval Catholic Church, there were something like 16 different modes of interpreting the Bible. It wasn't just literalist. Right. Okay? But that has never been the case in Islam, and that's the problem.
Well,
Islam has to get to where they could say, again, beheading, that's metaphorical. We don't do that anymore.
Acknowledging that is the problem, the other thing that he has said to me is that the problems that I have with current Christian accepted points of view on certain things take time. And some changes that happen over time also happen generationally. And there are generations that hold on to things, and those generations die off. And more informed generations, as they take their place, start to steer the ship. Mm-hmm. So at what point might we see, and this sort of brings me back to my point about Ibtihaj Muhammad and showing her off. Maybe we don't change the minds of the hardliners, the old folks in the Middle East. But maybe what we do is plant seeds in the young people who say, man, the West isn't that bad. We got opportunity over there. There are people over there who are able to be Muslim and do things that are interesting and show their greatness and things like that, express themselves. So maybe what we're doing is planting seeds for younger generations that will at some point take over And
Well, yeah.
do you think that the faith is ready for those types of moves?
Well,
And if not now, when?
yeah, a couple things about that. Well, first of all, what I'll say is I think it's a matter of decades, if not centuries, for Islam to change itself. And I don't like to use the term Reformation because I don't think Reformation is appropriate. I'm writing a short book right now. I hope to have it out this fall. How Islamic states, particularly the Ottomans, but a couple of other ones, dealt with groups like ISIS. Because frankly, groups like ISIS have been around before. Okay, they're not new. Right? The Ottoman Empire, which I think in many ways was truly moderate, dealt with these sorts of guys a lot. But one of the things I talk about in the introduction to this little book I'm writing is that we in the West tend to, and you were getting at this a little bit earlier, when we were talking about this whole thing about, well, ISIS is our fault. Well, everything's our fault. No, sometimes we're not. Everything is not our, because we're the instrumental factor, okay? We tend to make everything revolve around us, okay? So we created it's the West's fault, okay? Maybe it has nothing to do with the West. You know how we make every bad guy into Hitler? Every bad guy has to be Hitler.
Yes.
They're
the Nazis, yes.
I get so sick of that. Is that because the Nazis are the only guys we can agree on were bad?
They're the best bad guy ever, yeah.
Well, they certainly dressed the best. You got to give them that. They had the best uniform.
Mr. T.
Boss.
Oh, yeah, that's true. Hugo Boss, right.
Yeah, and those leather jackets, those guys were cool.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm glad we bombed them into the Stone Age, but they did look good as we were killing them.
Yeah.
But one thing I talk about is that now I lost my train of thought. Gosh, darn it, I've gone that rabbit hole.
Hugo bossed you off your point.
Yeah. Let's see. What was that question you asked me?
Well,
how long is it going to take? How long is it going to take?
Yeah.
Reformation. Yes, and my point was that just like we like to make every bad guy Hitler, we keep having to say that other cultures, particularly the Islamic one, other civilizations have to have a reformation, okay? Well, somebody says that really doesn't understand what the Reformation was, okay? The Reformation was basically when Luther nailed the 95 Theses on the church door in Wittenberg on Halloween of 1517, okay? Luther wasn't proclaiming like religious freedom. Luther was saying the Catholic Church has got way too much works righteousness and they've gotten too far away from the Bible. We need to get back to the Bible, sola scriptura, and back to faith in Christ to save you instead of indulgences and, sending money to the Pope and all this other stuff that it had turned into by his time, right? Now, sola scriptura, you already got that in the Quran, okay? The Quran alone, I mean, to a certain lesser extent, the hadiths, so-called sayings of Muhammad. But so they already pretty much got sola scriptura, okay? And sola fide, if you want to go ahead, mutatis mutandis, make the necessary changes. What we're talking about there with Islam is what's called tawheed, belief in the unity of God. So if you want to overemphasize that, that's what groups like ISIS do. So that idea of a reformation doesn't transfer, one-to-one from the Christian world to the Islamic world. What the Islamic world very much more is in need of, and this is why it will take decades, if not longer, is enlightenment, right? The Enlightenment was, again, when Voltaire and the other bewigged French intellectuals said that, we should be able to choose to be not just what kind of Christian we want to be, whether Lutheran or Catholic or Calvinist, which was sort of the point of the Reformation in some ways. We should be able to choose not to be religious at all, right? And the state should not enforce religion, right? And this, of course, were the founding ideas behind the founding of the United States. Jefferson and, people like that shared these ideas. But that's what Islam needs because, look, again, to harken back to what I said a moment ago, you can be killed, and many people are killed, simply for being a different kind of Muslim, like the Ahmadis we were talking about a moment ago. Okay, the Ahmadis are persecuted in pretty much every Islamic country they show up in. They are officially deemed non-Muslims in Pakistan, right? They can be jailed. Their mosques can be burned. They can be killed, and the police will look the other way. Okay. Islam has to get to the point where it respects its own minorities. I mean, look, Catholics and Baptists make fun of each other now, but again, and we Lutherans don't sneak over to the Catholic Church during Mass and wire their cars. Okay, maybe they did that in the 16th century, but they don't do it anymore. In Islam, that's a regular occurrence for people that are not of the majoritarian, usually Sunni or in Iran, 12 or Shia perspective or adherence. So Islam has to get to that. Okay, I think they can get there eventually. I think there's some seeds of that in Islamic society besides the sects that we talked about earlier. There was a movement in the early Islamic community that to somewhat extent still survives in some of the sects called the Mu'tazila movement. It's MU backwards hyphen TAZILA, Mu'tazila. And basically it was a movement that believed in sort of a non-total literal following of the Quran. We're talking like 8th century AD, okay? And they also believed much more in free will and much less in determinism.
Sunni Islam, where they're going.
Yeah. So Sunni Islam still very much is very deterministic. Allah controls everything. You don't have much free will. But the Mu'tazila were a group that didn't really believe this. They were fought against and eventually officially outlawed by the 8th or 9th century AD. But their ideas are still around, and there are certain people that really are trying to resurrect. If you know Zuhdi Jasser, Zuhdi is that medical doctor that shows up in the media a lot, who's a moderate Muslim. He lives out in Arizona, runs the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, I think it's called AIFD. And Zuhdi very much, although he will never use the term, is very much calling for bringing back the Mu'tazila movement. Now, he has a certain following in the United States. I don't know of anybody in the Middle East that pays any attention to him. But I think that if these ideas are still out there, they're held forth, people that share these points of views are assisted, if you will, in certain ways, that eventually I think it will have some impact in the Islamic world. And you're starting to see some of that. Again, I mentioned earlier, like President al-Sisi of Egypt called on the scholars at Al-Azhar and said, look, there are too many people committing acts of violence in the name of Islam. We have to do something about that. Of course, ultimately, they're not going to be able to do something about that until the violence in the Quran that we were talking about earlier and in the examples of Muhammad, until that violence is delegitimized. But by using some of these ideas and looking at their own history, hopefully Muslims can do this, because it's going to have to be Muslims. Okay, Barack Obama or David Cameron or Merkel or any Western leader is not going to be able to define Islam for Muslims. It's going to have to be Muslims to do it.
Are there people? I always think about Muqtada al-Sadr in a video I saw a long time ago, and he was at, I don't know, Karbala or Najaf, somewhere. He was speaking to his people, and there were a lot of, it looked like a crowd bigger than like at Wembley Stadium, and they were all emphatically beating on their chests as he was talking. Is there someone out there like Muqtada al-Sadr who's going to have that much pull? Because that's sort of his family business. Is he going to be able to lead people in that direction?
Well, he wouldn't lead them in that direction.
Sure, obviously, but someone like him?
Is there someone like that? There are some Muslim leaders. I honestly happen to think that this guy, Fethullah Gulen, that is being blamed by Erdogan for the failed coup in Turkey, is the kind of leader that advances a kind of Islam that actually would be good for the Islamic world. I've written about him. There's a Mauritanian sheikh whose name I can't remember off the top of my head. I've actually got a PowerPoint briefing where I did this for certain folks in the government on 4 guys that I think are pretty moderate. But Gulen's one of them. Another one is the Aga Khan, who you may or may not know is the very rich fellow who is the official head of the Ismaili branch of Islam.
That's Shaka's uncle, right?
I believe so. Yeah. Tell me something good. Maybe you could tell the rest of the Muslims something good. Boy, the young people have no idea what we're talking about here. But the Aga Khan, the Ismailis are interesting. There's about 15, 20 million of them. They are an offshoot of Shia. They are different from the Shia in Iran. They are in places like East Africa. There's some in Britain. There's some in India. Some in Southeast Asia. But what's really interesting about them, if you go back 800 years, they were the assassins. The assassins of the Middle Ages. Yeah. Who tried to kill Salah ad-Din, who sometimes fought against the Crusaders, sometimes fought with the Crusaders against other Muslims. But somewhere along the road between the Middle Ages and the 18th, 19th century, these guys dropped the entire idea of jihad and as violent jihad and said that jihad actually means building schools and vaccinating kids and things like that. The stuff that we see billboards and say it means, but for the world, most of the world's Muslims, is not really actually what it does mean. So the Aga Khan is one. some of the Sufi leaders, I think, I wrote an article that came out, God, I guess it was 8 or 9 years ago, and I included it in my Sects, Lies, and the Caliphate book, called Sexploitation, S-E-C-T-S, and I talk about some of this, that, instead of hanging out with guys from CARE or the Muslim Brotherhood, if the president or a president of the United States would bring some of these folks, the Aga Khan or the head of the Ahmadis, to the White House and say, and not, you don't have to say anything. Just bring him to a state dinner and talk to him and say, that would sort of give him a bit of a boost, if you will. Hopefully not get him killed in the process. But again, I think I take issue with, again, another issue I take with many of my conservative friends is that there's no such thing as moderate Islam. There is a such thing as moderate Islam. Now, I will grant you, as I've said earlier, mainstream Islam is, when it's, insofar as it's literalist, which is what it still is, sort of pre-Islamic Enlightenment, is problematic and way too violent. But that's not the only brand of Islam in town. There is moderate Islam, but I tend to think it exists in these sects that I've been talking about. And, again, it's an inter-Muslim argument. They're going to have to figure it out on their own. But in the meantime, there are steps that we're going to have to take to make sure they don't export their problems to us, which is unfortunately what's going on right now.
Well, I think that in helping them along to solve their problem, I agree with you that it is a problem that they absolutely must solve internally. I agree with you that they are going to have to determine the identity of Islam and move on it themselves. I think that our ability to influence how they come to that solution is the key. And I hope that somebody does start to take charge, who's belongs to one of the moderate sects that you mentioned. And I hope that is something that happens sooner than later, but I agree that it's probably going to be, we're talking about decades, if not centuries.
Right, it's going to be a while. It's going to be later.
The other thing, too, is this is a substantial change from what is normal right now. And whoever that person is, we can't forget that we've got, Jesus as this beacon of peacefulness and turning the other cheek. And that, whether we're religious or not, that speaks to our culture. That's where we come from. We have a Germanic sense of order. We have all these things. That's not going to be how this problem is solved. If this if this is a problem within the Islamic world that they need to solve, they're going to have a totally unique way of solving it. And this kind of change is going to be uncomfortable. And it likely has to be
for Muslims, yeah.
Well, and for us. I mean, we're going to
spill out. Their discomfort's going to spill out.
Well, it is uncomfortable for us because they're blowing people up in Paris and Belgium. Yes,
right, and here. I mean,
and here,
and that's part of the pain that maybe has to happen to get the people out there to say enough's enough. Let's modernize what we're doing here, and let's drag these other folks along with us. We all want, if we're a religion of peace, let's get to getting peaceful.
Well, it's never been a religion of peace. That's just propaganda garbage. Okay, I hopefully it will become one.
Yes,
it's not bad. Look at history. Again, I'm a world historian. I have a PhD in this field. But as my drill sergeant back at Fort Leonard Wood many years ago used to say, you don't take a GED. All right. You don't have to have a PhD to go read a little bit about Islamic history. Islam wasn't spread from the deserts of Arabia to the shores of the Atlantic and the shores of the Ganges by handing out brochures.
No, it was not. Yes.
It was spread by the sword.
Yeah.
Right? So is it any surprise that sort of idea exists? Yeah. Was Christianity spread by the sword? To a certain extent, yes. But Christianity, for the first 300 years it existed, and Bernard Lewis is wonderful on pointing this out in several of his books, for the first 3 centuries Christianity existed, it was a persecuted minority weirdo religion in the Roman Empire.
Right. It had to fight for its life.
Yeah. It had to fight just to survive, and many times people didn't survive. Yeah. It was a persecuted sect. So the sort of founding imprinted paradigm in Christianity is not one where you spread the faith by violence against others. I mean, people did that later, yes, but it's not intrinsic to the faith. Unfortunately, in a very much more serious sense and much more real sense, it tends to be much more intrinsic to Islam. Until, again, and I'm repeating myself here, but until Muslims disabuse themselves of that and figure out that, we don't have to be that there are ways of being Muslim without being like the people were in the 7th, 8th century, as you started out very early on here when we opened up. We're going to continue to have this problem. And the one that kills me, let me give you an example, gentlemen, okay? I'm speaking down here at Dragon Con this weekend and this fantasy sci-fi conference because in my other hat, I do not the Middle East, but I do Middle Earth, okay? I've written one book on Tolkien stuff, okay?
I love this, by the way. I love this.
I'm on a panel with some people, all right? I'm on panel Friday, then I'm giving a talk next Monday on my own. Politics of Middle Earth. I'm also writing a military history of Middle Earth. But I've got the Politics of Middle Earth book published. So I'm on a panel with these people to discuss military fantasy, all right? And this one guy finds out I'm on the panel and sends a tweet to me this morning. I'm checking the stuff out before church this morning. This guy tweets me, "Your views on Islam make me uncomfortable. I'm going to have to see about changing the panel." So I don't mean if he meant he's going to try and get me kicked off the panel or if he's going to get his sorry ass off the panel, okay? So I was going to call him and ask him what size skirt he wore. I thought perhaps I should do that.
Throw your glove at his face. Like, let's do this.
Oh, my God. Listen, two things. First of all, it's not about Islam. It's a freaking Tolkien panel, okay? So what difference does it make what I think about Islam? And secondly, dumbass, when you go do a PhD in Islamic history, you can tell me how uncomfortable my views make you. Until then, shut up, okay?
Yeah, you've got a license to have an opinion about Islam.
Oh, my God, that stuff just pisses me off. You know, it's Tom Nichols. I don't know if you follow Tom Nichols on Twitter. Tom's writing about the death of expertise. He wrote that article in The Federalist.
Oh, right, okay.
And he's writing a book on it, you know. It's just, it's like, oh, my God, every Tom, Dick, and Harry thinks they're an expert on Islam just because they listened to Bill Maher one night, you know.
A known expert on Islam, yes.
Oh, my God. But seriously, okay, this viewpoint, okay, my views make you uncomfortable. And this guy appeared to have his picture clearly shows that he's past puberty. So you are like an adult, ostensibly, and you don't like views that make you uncomfortable? Look, I don't particularly like the fact that there's a lot of terrorists shouting Allahu Akbar as they saw at people's necks. But that's the reality, all right? So until we deal with that, I mean, pretending that's not the case and saying it makes you uncomfortable to talk about it, not going to fix the problem.
Right. Yeah. That's for sure, man.
Yeah, so...
Well,
there's steam coming out of my ears now.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm going to cool you off a little bit. We've had you for an hour, and we really appreciate your hour. But, I lean to the left, and I can't speak for everybody on the left, of course, but I want to say that your views on Islam give me comfort.
Well, good.
So, I mean, it's just really what I'm looking for are answers that a lot of people don't have the knowledge, the expertise to give answers that are correct and true.
Well, I think they're correct. And the thing is, thank you for saying that. The thing is, look, I do research and I try to go where the results lead me. This is why, for instance, some of my conservative friends get mad at me. There's no such thing as moderate Islam. Oh, yes, there is. Of course there is. Don't be stupid. Sort of the extreme view of that on the right we get. And I ran into this I gave a couple talks at some tea parties down here. And they didn't like it when I said this because it's sort of an article of faith among many on the right that Islam's not a religion. You've heard that one, right? It's not a religion. What do you mean it's not a religion? Of course it's a religion.
Yeah, it's silly.
Because I don't like something doesn't mean that I have to kick it out of a category. Sociologically, historically, theologically, Islam is a religion. It's got a deity. It's got prophets. It's got an eschatology. It's got holy books. It's a religion, okay? So it's just silly.
That goes a little further into a list of qualifications for being a religion than I ever got. My main thing is I enjoy reason. And when reason is based on research and results and, actual good, solid thinking, that's what I'm after. And that's what you deliver to the world. And that's what I appreciate you sharing with us.
Well, thank you, sir. I tried.
You did.
Yeah.
You did, man. I really appreciate it.
And do each time.
Absolutely. I just tweeted out that you bring the wood to the bonfire. We can all talk and hem and haw.
You guys bring the gasoline.
Yeah, exactly. I'm encouraging you to go on the Jay Moore Show. Get yourself out to L.A. because Jay will have a ball with this. You will enjoy it, and it'll be worth your time to do it. So I highly encourage you.
If I can get out there, I will.
Cool.
All right.
Thank you, everybody. Read now. I'm going to encourage everybody to just look up Dr. Tim Furnish on Amazon.
Listen, just go to Amazon. Yeah,
Yeah.
I got an author page. Timothy Furnish. Look me up. My books are all there.
You'll see a bunch of
And
things.
some cool pictures of my various trips to the Middle East.
Yeah. Thank you once again. Dr. Tim Furnish, everybody.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.